With that story out of the Middle East, and U.S. President Donald Trump has made fresh threats against Iran. Taking to his social media account yesterday, Trump warned that if Iran strikes the U.S., it won't hesitate to retaliate. Now, Trump adds that the U.S. bombing will continue as long as necessary. Some experts say these tensions carry serious geopolitical and economic consequences for the African region. Researcher from the Thabo Mbeki School for Public and International Affairs, Advocate Sipho Mantula, joins us now for more. Advocate, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it this morning. So good morning to you here on Newzroom Afrika. Why does this have the possibility or the capability of creating such a massive stir across the African continent?
Refreshing morning and Jumbo Africa to your viewers. My brother, you'll understand that whenever conflict erupts in the Gulf, markets will react instantly. But also for the African continent, we are in a real situation that it will not be clear when will this end. If you look at the geopolitics of the rising prices of oil, that impact will go also on the exchange rates. It will also go on the electricity generation. Inflation, Africa central banks. But if you go deeper into it, Warabil, if you will try to break it down, is the issues that will affect the African continent, but also the positive aspect is that the oil producing states like Nigeria, Angola, and Libya stand that chance to benefit out of this crisis. And that's where one looks at as an economic shock absorbers or tremors, but it will also have an impact on the fuel pumps, the supermarkets, the national budgets of African member states. And considering that Iran is part of the global south, it is part of the BRICS member states. So that's how you look at the tensions that definitely when Iran bends, Africa pays.
Yeah, I suppose the worry though, and if we stick on just the oil theme for a moment, there's a glut of oil globally. And so the price is down. Iran used to be an absolutely massive player, and while it's come back into the oil exporting world, there was a time where the sanctions on it prevented it from even selling oil. I remember even South Africa used to buy oil from Iran at some stage, and that faded away. President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for diplomacy and some kind of conversation. Do you think we're past that? Does Africa even have any diplomatic leverage here?
No, it do, Warabile, but remember that South Africa is also sitting at the AU Peace and Security Council. The AU also has raised their bar in terms of the impact of this conflict. And in the sense that diplomacy also plays out, Warabile, at the UN Security Council. But on a bilateral level, South Africa has been enjoying a good relation with Iran. So it will be equally concerned about the international leverage of diplomacy. How do we go back to the issue of respecting of international rule-based laws? Because here you are again having a violation of what happened in January when Venezuela was attacked. Again, we see this as an American revenge of 1979. Because if you look here, it seems that it is the settling of old scores, but also when you look at both Operation Epic Fury and the Lion's Roar by both Israel and US, it threatens the issues of claiming that they are trying to deal with military capabilities of Iran. And that's where, as South Africa, when we enter that debate, we must always remind them of the Pelindaba Agreement of 1995, that yes, Iran has went through the UN inspection where there is a zero issues around its missile generation, but Israel also, Arabia, has capability. The US has been using all these issues of regime change. And how do you do regime change in a theocratic state? Because Iran doesn't practice democracy, they practice theocracy, and that's where you find a vast difference.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. I mean, this is not the first time that the United States has even looked for regime change in many different countries. And many examples have left those countries worse than before, similarly in the Middle Eastern region itself. Should we be worried that South Africa begins to alienate itself even further from whether it be Israel or the United States because of what you made note of, the relationship between South Africa and Iran. And then we make note of course, South Africa's case at the ICJ against Israel previously.
Absolutely, but here you can't play the game of being non-aligned when, as you have mentioned, the last point that I was going to raise, that probably also our sin and our blame is because we have taken Israel to the ICJ. And secondly, we have been having tensions with US since 2025. But I think South Africa has a leverage of now consolidating an African bloc consensus on understanding the geopolitics of the Middle East. And also, if you look, our own citizens are also stranded in some of the international airports. So we cannot sit back and say we are going to be non-aligned. It is also important, our role at the UN Security Council. How do we put pressure to the African member states who are sitting in the non-permanent seat? And that's where they say international diplomacy is playing out about South Africa being concerned, but also putting pressure to the warring parties or to the fighting states. But what I picked up, what I believe, is this Operation Epic Fury, as well as the Lion's Roar. When will it end? Because it is causing total harm, destruction to ordinary citizens. It is causing tensions also in the maritime trade routes, because here, once you close the airspace, you might want to rely on the naval space. But the naval space is also under attack. And hence, diplomacy of South Africa must always be the one of negotiation and a peaceful resolution. Despite, like I said, America is in the military state. As Professor Jeffrey Sachs said, America is no longer a constitutional state. It has turned to become a military state. And that's how we should push for the issue of a military intervention as a last resort to any conflict.
All these attacks are also happening during the month of Ramadan, right? And one wonders the significance of the cultural and religious dimension of all of this, especially for Africa's Muslim communities then. I mean, this could be really seen as possibly the worst thing you could do, especially during Ramadan.
Absolutely. This is across human rights of their religious freedom, their religious practice, but look at the quick turn on it. It will unify the Muslim community like never before. Hence, you saw over the weekend many protests in American embassies. So there is no longer the issue of regime change rhetoric, but as you said, the undermining of the practice of the Muslim community during this period of fasting. And now it will put more emphasis in terms of religious protection of their freedom. And that's how, when we look at it, not many people could look that aspect, but there is an effect on it. And the question of also of how the government of Iran is going to respond, not only without prayers, but they will respond by putting petitions at the UN Security Council, but by also applying Article 51 of the United Nations Charter in terms of self-defense. Because here, you can rely on prayer, but prayer alone cannot bring peace. Hence, you need to put a diplomatic pressure by also requesting and demanding religious freedom.
Yeah. Have maybe African or even global multilateral forums, have those weakened completely? Or are they just there by name? Because it used to be a case of if you were thwarted, if you were told that you did something unjust as a country, you'd perhaps listen, you'd be willing to understand it, you'd be willing to take it on, whether it's the UN or anybody else for that matter. Now, it just seems like even if everybody just says we condemn the actions, it means absolutely nothing.
Absolutely, but you see the pressure that I picked up from Russia by pushing the UN Security Council for emergency meeting. And you are correct. What then is the role of the multilateral organization? What then is the role of the BRICS Plus? Is it just to issue statements of condemnation, statements of condolences? But I think there is a pressure somewhere, Warabil, and I think it is still early for us. It's almost 72 hours, this conflict again, researched again, but it is important for us to look, as you say, how do we test the power of the multinational organizations beyond media statements, but also look at how America is using the power of the social media in terms of communicating their actions. And that's where I think the counter-narrative that must come from African member states and the global south, it must be beyond issuing media statements. And I think the protests on the streets are actually raising the new ways of raising issues beyond diplomatic forum. And that's where you can raise the issue that Trump, with this initiative of trying to set the board of peace, is he undermining the UN Security Council? Is he undermining also the Congress? Because all these conflicts, one will characterize them as a military-led intelligence operations. There's no way they can represent the interest of Americans or the interest of the global south. And that's where it is important for us to constantly hold the multinationals accountable when we are in this crisis.
Afrika, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Advocate Sipho Mantula from the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, joining us as we talk more about the US, Israel and Iran conflict happening out of the Middle East.